The airport buzzed with restless energy. Suitcases rolled across the tile floor, flight announcements echoed overhead, and travelers rushed between gates. But one man stood still, Colonel Marcus Greene, dressed in full military uniform, shoulders squared, eyes steady. Every medal on his chest told a story of service. But today, his mission was unlike any battlefield assignment. On the tarmac outside, a casket waited, draped in the American flag, carrying home Private First Class Evan Parker, a soldier barely old enough to rent a car, but old enough to give his life for his country. Marcus moved toward the airline counter with quiet determination. This was not his first time escorting a fallen soldier. The process was always somber but straightforward. Military orders, ID check, a nod of respect, then a seat on the flight. But something fell off. The young woman behind the counter glanced at his uniform, then at her computer screen. Her smile tightened. Her fingers paused mid-keystroke. "Sir, I need to check something," she said, her voice low, her tone suddenly clipped. Marcus handed over the necessary documents without hesitation. The papers were in perfect order. His credentials left no room for doubt. But as she disappeared behind a divider, whispers began among the other staff. Side glances, quick conversations just out of earshot. When she returned, her expression had changed entirely. "I'm sorry, Colonel Greene," she said, avoiding his eyes. "But we can't allow you to board this flight." The words landed harder than any bullet Marcus had faced overseas. For a brief second, the terminal noise seemed to fade. People behind him shifted, sensing tension but unsure why. Marcus tightened his jaw. He would not raise his voice. Not here. Not yet. But one thing was certain. This flight was not leaving without answers. The agent's refusal hung in the air, thick and unsettling. Colonel Marcus Greene stood motionless, his military orders still clutched in his hand. Years of discipline kept his expression steady, but inside, a storm was beginning to build. Marcus had faced hostile checkpoints overseas. He had stood between soldiers and incoming fire. But standing here, in full uniform, denied the right to complete his mission. That was a different kind of battle. He shifted his weight slightly, scanning the counter for any sign of reason. The woman who had denied him kept her gaze fixed on her monitor, typing something but making no effort to explain further. The line behind him continued to grow. Parents with restless children, business travelers scrolling through emails, elderly couples leaning on carry-ons. People noticed him. People always noticed the uniform. But this time, it was for all the wrong reasons. Marcus took a steadying breath. Losing composure now would only make this worse. "I need to speak with your supervisor," he said, keeping his tone measured. The agent froze for a moment, then nodded without lifting her eyes. She disappeared behind a glass door near the back of the counter area. Marcus remained where he was, unmoving. His years in the army had taught him to recognize deflection tactics. What was happening here had little to do with paperwork. This was hesitation rooted in something else, something the airline staff was unwilling to say out loud. He looked down at the folder in his hand. Everything was in order. His military travel orders were signed, dated, and authorized. There was no reason, none at all, for this denial. Passengers began to shift around him. Conversations died down. People started watching. A businessman in a gray suit furrowed his brow, stealing glances at the counter. A young couple whispered between themselves, their eyes darting toward Marcus. Minutes dragged by. When the agent finally returned, she was not alone. A man in his mid-50s walked beside her, adjusting his tie and wearing a name tag that marked him as Rick Simmons, shift supervisor. "Colonel Greene," Rick began, using that overly practiced customer service voice. "Thank you for your patience. Unfortunately, there seems to be a security protocol issue. We are unable to clear you for this flight at this time." The words felt rehearsed, polished, empty. Marcus locked eyes with him. "My documentation is complete. This is a military assignment. There is no reason I should not be on that flight." Rick's stance shifted. His smile remained, but the cracks were starting to show. "I understand, sir," he said, "but these things happen from time to time. It is just a matter of following standard procedures." Standard procedures. Marcus almost laughed at the phrase. During deployment, standard procedures meant life or death decisions. Here, It felt like a shield for incompetence or worse, discrimination. Behind him, someone coughed uncomfortably. Another passenger pulled out a phone, holding it low but angled toward the counter. Marcus noticed but said nothing. "Sir, if you could just step aside, we will see what we can do," Rick offered, gesturing toward a nearby seating area. "I will not be stepping aside," Marcus replied, his voice calm but with an unmistakable edge. "I have a duty to complete, and I am not leaving this counter until I am given a clear explanation." Rick hesitated. The surrounding passengers picked up on the tension. Whispered conversations grew louder. The businessman in the gray suit shook his head in quiet disbelief. The young couple exchanged worried looks. Another agent behind the counter leaned close to Rick, whispering something Marcus could not hear. Rick nodded but did not meet Marcus's gaze. More minutes slipped by. The line of waiting passengers grew restless, but their attention stayed locked on the unfolding scene. That Marcus's mind flashed back to other times in his life where silence had been used as a weapon. Diplomats who stalled for time. Foreign officials who avoided responsibility. But this was happening on home soil, at a civilian airport, in front of dozens of witnesses. A woman in a denim jacket, standing halfway down the line, pulled out her phone and started recording openly now. Marcus stayed rooted in place. Rick Simmons adjusted his tie again, clearly feeling the pressure. "We are doing everything we can, sir. If you would just give us a few more minutes." "You have already had more than a few minutes," Marcus said, interrupting him without raising his voice. "This is no longer just a delay. This is a denial of duty." Rick's forced smile faltered. The man with the phone at the back of the line lifted it higher. Another woman whispered to her husband, glancing toward Marcus with visible concern. What had started as a small inconvenience was growing into something much larger. And Marcus knew one thing for certain. This situation was far from over. The air near the counter grew heavier with every passing second. Conversations in the terminal softened. People who had been scrolling through phones or chasing after children were now standing still, their attention drawn to the unfolding scene at Gate 14. Colonel Marcus Greene remained rooted in place, his shoulders squared, uniform flawless, voice steady. But behind his calm exterior, his patience stretched thin. Rick Simmons, the airline supervisor, avoided eye contact. The agent behind the counter kept her head low, pretending to scroll through the computer screen. But her trembling hands betrayed her nerves. From the back of the line, a new voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem with his military clearance?" The words were simple, but they landed with weight. Heads turned to an older man stepped forward, mid-60s, stocky build, with a deep tan and sharp eyes that had seen their share of battles. A faded USMC cap sat low on his forehead. His name, embroidered in black thread just above the bill, read Hank Morales. Rick Simmons looked startled. "No, sir. This is not about clearance," he said quickly. Hank crossed his arms. "Then what is it?" The question hung unanswered. "I have walked through security lines 1,000 times," Hank continued, voice steady but rising just enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "And I have never once seen a uniformed officer with proper orders. Denied an escort flight. Never." Passengers started to murmur. Someone near the windows pulled out their phone. Another traveler, standing off to the side with a rolling suitcase, began recording openly. A young woman, barely in her 20s, stood near one of the terminal's charging stations. She had been watching from the start. Now she raised her phone, activated her live stream app, and began broadcasting. Her name was Tasha Bell, and within seconds, the small red dot next to her screen went live. "I am at the airport right now," she said softly but clearly, speaking into her phone as her camera captured the full scene behind her. "There is a soldier being denied his flight while escorting a fallen hero. No explanation. Just policy. People need to see this." A few passengers standing nearby noticed what she was doing and leaned closer, glancing at her screen. Rick Simmons cleared his throat, suddenly aware of the cameras pointed his way. "We are following standard security protocol," he repeated. But the words felt thinner now, less convincing with every passing second. Hank Morales took another step forward. "This man is wearing the uniform of the United States Army," he said, his voice carrying across the terminal. "And he is here on official duty. So I am asking you, right here, in front of all these people, What exactly is stopping him from boarding that flight? Rick shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The agent at the counter froze completely, her fingers hovering above the keyboard, unsure whether to continue typing or stop altogether. Passengers around the terminal were no longer just curious observers. They were participants now. A middle-aged woman in a denim jacket clutched her purse tighter and whispered to her husband, "This is wrong. They cannot treat him like this." A young man in a hoodie stood against the wall, thumbs moving rapidly. As he typed something on social media, every few seconds, he glanced up, filming short clips and posting them in real time. The energy shifted. What began as a private moment of injustice was now public, visible, and growing by the minute. Marcus kept his gaze forward, not reacting outwardly, but inside he took mental note of every voice speaking up. Every camera pointed in his direction. Another passenger, standing near the gate seating area, raised his phone and called out, "Hey, someone explain why he is being denied." Rick's professional facade cracked further. "Sir, please, we are working on a solution," he said, raising both hands as if to calm the crowd. But the crowd was past calming. Tasha Bell's live stream numbers climbed. The comments on her screen poured in fast. "Name the airline." "Unacceptable." "Post his name." "Post the staff." "Let him fly." The Marine, Hank Morales, stayed planted beside Marcus. His arms folded, his stare unwavering. It was the kind of look that said he had stood his ground in places far more dangerous than this. Marcus stayed silent, but met Hank's gaze for a brief second. No words were needed. Respect was exchanged in that glance alone. The phones continued recording. More voices joined in.by now. Even travelers walking past nearby gates paused to ask what was happening. The ripple effect had started. The airline's quiet denial had turned into something visible, shared, unstoppable. Rick Simmons checked his watch, glanced toward the back office, then stepped away from the counter with hurried steps, disappearing behind the frosted glass door. The staff remaining at the counter stood frozen, unsure what to do next. Marcus remained exactly where he was. Tall, steady, unmoved. He knew this story had only just begun. The minutes dragged by, but Colonel Marcus Greene did not move. His uniform remained sharp, his posture unshaken. Around him, the mood in the terminal kept shifting. More passengers pulled out their phones. Some recorded video. Others typed furious posts. Tasha Bell's live stream had gained hundreds of viewers. Within minutes, comments flooded her screen, each one louder and angrier than the last. Behind the counter, the airline staff looked overwhelmed. The young woman who first denied Marcus stood frozen, staring at her computer but not typing a single word. Her hands shook each time she reached for the mouse. Then Rick Simmons returned. But this time, he was not alone. A second man walked beside him. This new arrival wore a neatly pressed navy suit and carried a leather tablet. His airline badge clipped. To his pocket read Daniel Cross, Operations Manager. Daniel's steps were quick but controlled. His face showed none of the panic now spreading across the terminal, but his eyes moved fast, scanning the crowd, noting every phone pointed in their direction. He stopped just short of the counter. "Colonel Greene," Daniel said with a practiced, smooth tone. "First, let me start by apologizing for the confusion. It seems there has been a miscommunication. We are working quickly to resolve the issue." Marcus kept his gaze steady. "A miscommunication?" he asked, his voice low but clear. Daniel adjusted his tie. "Yes, sir. Just a small error in our system. Nothing intentional." The crowd did not buy it. Hank Morales, the Marine veteran, let out a sharp breath and folded his arms tighter across his chest. "Funny how your errors only seem to happen to soldiers in uniform," Hank said loud enough for people nearby to hear. Passengers around the terminal nodded in agreement. Some began speaking up. "This is ridiculous. Let him board. He is doing his duty." Daniel's smile faded for a second, but he quickly recovered. "We are doing everything we can to fix this," he said, but the phones kept rolling. Tasha Bell's live stream viewers doubled again. The comments came faster. "Where's the CEO? This is discrimination. Share this. Tag the airline." Another man standing near a row of chairs lifted his phone and shouted, "It is already trending." Daniel Cross exchanged a worried glance with Rick Simmons. Marcus took a slow breath. "If this is just a system error," he said, "then why was I told there was a security protocol issue?" Daniel hesitated. Sometimes our staff uses general terms while we investigate. That is not acceptable, Marcus replied. Passengers nearby murmured again, their frustration growing. Rick Simmons stepped forward, trying to regain control. Colonel, we absolutely respect your service. That is not in question. We simply need to follow procedures before clearing you. The words sounded rehearsed. Mechanical. Hollow. Marcus stayed silent, letting the weight of their excuses hang in the air. Tasha turned her phone toward herself for a brief second, addressing her viewers directly. This is happening in real time, she said. A U.S. Army colonel, in uniform, with full papers, is being denied his flight while escorting a fallen soldier. And they are giving him nothing but fake apologies. Behind her, more passengers had pulled out their phones. The energy in the terminal felt electric now, like something about to break wide open. Someone near the back shouted, "Where is the news media? Someone call the press." A younger man, standing by the windows, already had. "It is on Twitter," he said, holding up his screen for others to see. "It is blowing up." Daniel Cross ran a hand across his forehead. The pressure was showing. Now, Rick Simmons leaned in, whispering something to him urgently. Marcus remained still. Years of military service had taught him how to hold ground under pressure. This was no battlefield, but the stakes felt just as high. Passengers near the seating area stood up. Others moved closer to the counter, crowding the space. Airline staff behind the scenes peeked through small glass windows. Watching but not stepping in, someone from a nearby gate walked over and asked, "What is going on here?" Within seconds, that person also started recording. Daniel Cross tried. Once more, "Sir, we can offer you a seat on the next available flight. First class, of course." "That is not the point," Marcus said. The words landed hard. The Marine veteran grunted in agreement. "Why now?" Even the airport's overhead announcement system felt distant. Flight numbers and gate changes faded into background noise. All focus remained on one thing: the man in uniform being denied the right to honor a fallen soldier. Daniel checked his phone. The look on his face darkened. Rick Simmons stepped away again, disappearing through the same glass door as before. Marcus stayed where he was. The crowd waited. The phones kept rolling, and the story kept spreading. The crowd near Gate 14 had grown even larger. Passengers from nearby terminals wandered over, curious about the scene that had now taken over the airport. Colonel Marcus Greene remained steady, standing tall in his uniform. His focus stayed on the mission. The remains of Private First Class Evan Parker still waited on the tarmac, and Marcus had every intention of seeing that young soldier safely home. Rick Simmons had disappeared again. Daniel Cross, the airline's operations manager, stood near the counter, nervously checking his phone every few seconds. His earlier confidence had crumbled. Sweat lined his forehead. A few feet away, Tasha Bell continued her live stream, reading new comments from people all over the country. Hank Morales, the Marine veteran, stood with his arms crossed, his stare fixed on Daniel. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted again. A man in a dark blue military service uniform entered the terminal with quick, purposeful steps. His presence alone parted the crowd like water. The golden insignia on his shoulders, the polished shoes, the clipped ID badge with Department of the Army markings. This was no airline employee. This was someone with real authority. Passengers near the front moved aside instinctively. The man approached Marcus directly and extended his hand. His voice carried strength and command. "Colonel Greene," he said, "I am Major Daniel Foster, Department of the Army. I was informed of the situation here." Marcus shook the major's hand with a firm grip. "Sir," he replied simply. "Major." Foster turned toward Daniel Cross and the airline staff. His eyes narrowed slightly as he scanned the stunned employees. "We are taking control of this situation now," Major Foster said. "Effective immediately." Daniel Cross's face paled. "Major, we were just about to get Colonel Greene on the next." Major Foster raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. His tone stayed polite, but his words cut sharp and fast. "No," Major Foster said firmly. "Colonel Greene and the remains of Private First Class Parker will not be flying commercial." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones lifted higher. Tasha adjusted her camera angle to capture every second. Daniel Cross blinked. "Sir, we can upgrade him. First class, if anything needed." Major Foster's expression did not change. "The Pentagon has arranged for a private military transport. The aircraft is already on its way. Colonel Greene's mission is too important to leave in your hands any longer. Gasps spread through the terminal. A few people even clapped softly. Hank Morales let out a low, satisfied grunt. That is more like it, he muttered under his breath. Daniel Cross swallowed hard. His earlier excuses and apologies now felt meaningless in the face of federal authorities standing in his terminal. Behind the counter, the original airline agent who had first denied Marcus stood frozen. Her eyes darted between her supervisor and the major. She did not say a word. Major Foster continued, turning back to Marcus. Sir, your transport will depart within the hour. You will have full military honors on arrival. Marcus gave a small nod. Thank you, Major. Major Foster's gaze flicked back to Daniel Cross one last time. This will be addressed. He said that IT was not a suggestion. It was a promise. Daniel did not argue. He knew better. The crowd near Gate 14 erupted. Passengers cheered. Tasha's live stream chat exploded with comments. Justice served. Thank you, Army. They had no choice once the military stepped in. Marcus took one final look at the people gathered there. Strangers who had spoken up. Passengers who had recorded every second. A veteran who had stood at his side without hesitation. He adjusted his uniform, straightened his hat, and gave Hank a small nod of gratitude. I appreciate you, Marcus said. Hank returned the gesture. We look out for our own. Major Foster stepped forward again. Colonel, your escort vehicle is waiting outside. Let us finish this mission. With that, Marcus turned, leaving the counter behind. Phones continued filming as he walked with Major Foster toward the exit. Daniel Cross remained standing there, staring at the crowd, the phones, the disappointed faces. His airline had lost control of the narrative. The damage was done, and this story was far from over. The private military transport arrived, just as Major Foster promised. Colonel Marcus Greene stood tall as the casket carrying Private First Class Evan Parker was loaded onto the aircraft with full honors. Soldiers from the local base stood in formation at the edge of the tarmac, saluting as the flag-draped casket was secured. Marcus kept his gaze forward, steady and clear. His mission was back on course. The flight itself was quiet. No passengers asking questions. No airline staff giving hollow apologies. Just Marcus, the crew, and the silent weight of duty. Hours later, Marcus stood on a small airfield in Parker's hometown. The sun hung low in the sky as the grieving family gathered near the runway. Evan's mother clutched a folded flag to her chest, her face streaked with tears. His father stood with both hands shaking, unable to speak. Marcus approached them slowly. He removed his hat, bowed his head, and stood at attention as Evan's remains were lowered from the aircraft. This was why Marcus had refused to back down. This was why he had stood at that airline counter without flinching. Evan Parker deserved dignity, nothing less. While Marcus fulfilled his duty, the ripple effects of what happened at the airport spread like wildfire. News stations across the country ran the story. Video clips from Tasha Bell's livestream played on major networks. Reporters stood outside the same airport terminal where the incident unfolded, broadcasting live updates. Headlines pulled no punches. Airline under fire after denying military. Colonel escorting fallen soldier. Public outrage grows as videos go viral. Calls for boycott as veteran groups demand accountability. Social media exploded with hashtags calling for justice. The veterans organizations released official statements condemning the airline's behavior. Politicians began speaking out. Local and national leaders demanded answers. The airline's corporate office scrambled to contain the fallout. Stock prices slipped as investor confidence dropped overnight. By the end of the week, the CEO appeared on live television, standing stiffly behind a podium. His words sounded carefully written by lawyers and public relations staff. We deeply regret the unfortunate misunderstanding involving Colonel Marcus Greene, the CEO said. We have placed all employees involved on administrative leave, pending a full internal review. The statement did not calm the public. Major veterans groups announced they were filing a formal complaint against the airline. A lawsuit quickly followed, backed by military advocacy coalitions and civil rights organizations. Financial analysts began reporting that the airline's reputation might take years to rebuild. Comment sections under every corporate post filled with angry comments. Customers canceled flights. Calls for boycotts grew louder by the hour. Back in Parker's hometown, None of that mattered to Marcus in this moment. Standing with Evan's family, he felt the same responsibility that had driven him every day of his military career. This had never been about headlines or public anger. That IT had always been about one thing: honoring the promise made to every soldier who never made it home. Marcus stayed with the family through the full military funeral. He stood at attention as the rifles fired in salute. He presented the folded flag to Evan's mother with steady hands. Later, as he walked back toward his vehicle, a small group of local veterans stood waiting near the gate. They had seen the news. They had followed every second of what happened at the airport. One of them, wearing a faded army jacket, stepped forward and simply said, "Thank you, Colonel." Marcus nodded once. "We look out for our own," he replied. The journey had ended, but the impact of what happened was only beginning. The sun had already started to set when Colonel Marcus Greene stood alone at the edge of the cemetery. The funeral had ended. The final salute had been given. The folded flag now rested in the hands of Evan Parker's mother. Marcus remained for a few quiet moments, letting the weight of the day settle in his chest. This mission had never been about him. It had never been about making a scene or going viral. It had been about one thing: respect. The kind of respect every service member deserves. The kind of dignity that should never depend on cameras, social media, or public outrage. Marcus knew that if no one at the airport had spoken up, if no one had pulled out their phones, if strangers had stayed silent, he might still be standing at that counter, fighting for a seat that should have been his from the beginning. That truth stayed with him. As he turned to leave the cemetery, he thought about all the people who had chosen not to look away. The Marine veteran who spoke first, the young woman who hit go live without hesitation, the passengers who raised their voices when they saw injustice unfolding right in front of them. Marcus realized something important that day. Sometimes speaking up is uncomfortable. Sometimes it feels easier to mind your own business. But when people stand together, when even one person takes that first step, it gives others the courage to follow. Injustice only grows when good people stay silent. This story should not have needed to go viral for action to happen. It should have ended the moment Marcus showed his orders and his ID, but it did not. And that is why stories like this matter. Because next time, the cameras might not be rolling. Next time, someone like Marcus might stand alone. Let this be a reminder. Speak up, stand together, hold people accountable, because dignity, respect, and basic human decency should never come with conditions.